Chapter 7. Arthur led me down an overgrown path, stopping now and then to examine a crumbling building or the remains of a ride. Here and there storybook figures emerged from the kudzu, lopsided, grotesque, their noses gone, their fingers missing, their skin leprous with moss and mold. The place was a nightmare version of Mother Goose. "Do you read Zippy the Pinhead?" Arthur asked. "The comic strip?" I shook my head, too amazed by my surroundings to be interested in anything else. "Zippy's this guy with a pointed head and a little top knot tied with a bow. He wears a long robe and he loves talking to giant sculptures, the kind that advertise things like restaurants and ice cream stands and car repair shops." I glanced at Arthur. "Yeah?" "In one strip, Zippy came here once and talked to some of them." Arthur waved his arm at the crumbling statues. "Now that I think about it, Dad loves Zippy," I said, "but I always thought he was kind of boring." "You just don't get the humor." Arthur's tone of voice suggested I might not be smart enough to appreciate Zippy. "It's very erudite, which means—" "I know what it means," I interrupted. "I'm just as smart as you are. I just don't like Zippy, that's all." Arthur shrugged and kept walking. In a few minutes we came to a pond scummed so thick with algae it looked as if you could walk on it without getting your feet wet. Across a little bridge was a big blue whale made of fiberglass, chipped and worn from years of snow and sleet and rain. Kids had spray painted him all over with graffiti and gang tags. "It's Willie the Whale." Arthur led the way across the bridge and knelt down beside the old hulk. Pushing some vines aside, he crawled into the whale's huge open mouth. "Grandma took a picture of me in here." He struck a silly pose and grinned. "I wore a paper crown. They gave you one when you bought a ticket. I was King Arthur. Get it?" The whale smelled damp and mildewy, like an old basement with no windows. Spider webs hung from the roof of Willie's mouth, filled with little mummified insects. Beetles scurried away into the dark. Slugs had left slimy trails everywhere. "This is disgusting," I told Arthur. "It was fun when I was little." He picked at a red flake of paint on Willie's tongue. "Shh!" I grabbed his arm. "Somebody's coming." Without a word, the two of us pressed ourselves against the back of Willie's mouth, somewhere near his tonsils. Images of drug dealers and dangerous criminals flitted across the little movie screen in my head. Here we were, miles from help. No one knew where we were. Mom had warned me about lonely places. Why hadn't I listened? Soon 2 people appeared. One was Nina, wearing tan shorts and a plain white t-shirt, her expensive camera hanging from a shoulder strap. She looked as classy as ever. The man with her was in his 20s, maybe younger. His dark glasses made it hard to tell. He wore faded jeans with one knee ripped out. His arms were tattooed from wrist to shoulder, and his hair was cut so short I could see his scalp. Next to him, Johnny looked like the all-American boy. "It's Billy Jarman," Arthur whispered. Nina must have taken Johnny's advice and asked him to show her the sights. He shook his head in disgust. "She should have hired me." "He looks mean," I said. Arthur nodded. "He's already been in jail at least twice. Once for breaking and entering, and once for stealing a Humvee and tearing up the magic forest with it. Knocked down a bunch of buildings and things just for the heck of it." Billy and Nina stopped on the bridge a few feet away from our hiding place. While he tossed stones at beer cans floating in the gunky water, she leaned against the rail and scanned the park as though she was scouting out good pictures. "So you think it's here somewhere?" she asked Billy. "Must be. It's not in the house. Whoever killed her trashed the whole place looking for it. The cops searched too." Billy sank a beer can with a stone and made the kind of explosion sound that 3rd graders make when playing war. Me and Johnny were thinking of searching the house ourselves, he said, just in case they missed something. Nina shot Billy a frown and he grinned. Just kidding. We're law-abiding citizens, me and him. We'd never do nothing wrong. Hearing this, Arthur poked my side and snickered. Who do you think was riding in the Humvee with Billy when he went on his little spree? He whispered. From the look Nina gave Billy, I had a feeling she wasn't totally convinced he was telling her the truth about his aversion to crime. Billy lobbed another stone and sunk a beer bottle. Kerpow! We didn't think anybody would ever buy Mrs. Donaldson's house, he said. But then that real estate agent got a hold of it. Mrs. DeSilvio's so slick, she could sell George Washington off a $1 bill. I guess she learned some tricks from her old man. Nina looked at him curiously. What do you mean? He spat into the pond. Mr. DeSilvio ain't what most people think. He puts on airs and sponsors soccer teams and donates money to the library and the hospital. But you dig deep enough, you'll find he's got another side altogether. Maybe I should interview him. You won't learn nothing from that guy, Billy said. Like I said, he's slicker than slick. He owns the corporation that bought this property. Nina waved a hand at the kudzu and the overgrown paths and poor old Willie crumbling away in his scummy pond. I hear he got it cheap. Nobody thought it was worth anything then. I mean, the place was broke and people were starting to go to big parks like King's Dominion. You ever been there? They got some great rides. The Rebel Yell, the Cobra. Billy threw a stone at Willie. It bounced off the fiberglass over our heads with a loud thunk. Nina nodded thoughtfully and aimed her camera at the whale. Just a few more pictures, she said, and then we can leave. Arthur chose that moment to scoot out of Willie's mouth straight into another photo opportunity. What are you kids doing here? Billy yelled. I was about to run, but Arthur walked right up to him. What's it to you? Billy scowled, but Arthur stood his ground, arms folded, and looked him in the eye. Why was he always bent on antagonizing people who could pulverize us? First Danny and his gang, now Billy. Was he crazy or what? Nina stepped in front of Arthur. I met these boys at the library, she told Billy. Logan lives in the house where Mrs. Donaldson was murdered, and Arthur lives next door. His grandmother, still scowling, Billy said, I already know Arthur and his grandmother. Well then, Nina turned to me with an apologetic smile. Logan, this is Billy Jarman. She spoke as if we were guests at a fancy garden party meeting at the refreshment table. Pleased to meet you. I offered to shake his hand the way I'd been taught, but he ignored me. So much for being a peacemaker. I wanted to see where Mrs. Donaldson worked, Nina told us, but I wasn't easy about coming here alone. Johnny didn't have time to show me the park, so he gave me Billy's number. It's such a fascinating place, absolutely surreal. While Nina talked, Billy sighed and shifted his weight from his left foot to his right foot and back again, obviously bored. I asked you what you're doing here, he muttered to Arthur. You're showing Nina around and I'm showing Logan around, Arthur said in a sassy voice that made me cringe. Just now I seen a copperhead sunning itself on the path near the gate, Billy said. If one of them suckers bite you, copperheads won't bother you if you don't bother them, Arthur said in his most irritating know-it-all voice. I tugged at his arm to shut him up. We ought to go, I said. It must be nearly dinner time. Snakes ain't all you got to worry about, Billy went on. Dopers hang out here, gangs, types you don't want to be messing with. Oh, Billy, please stop. Nina looked nervously around as if she expected to see criminals lurking in the kudzu. You're scaring me. She wasn't the only one he was scaring. Thanks to Billy, the deserted park had taken on a creepy atmosphere, and I was more than ready to leave. I tugged at Arthur's arm again, harder this time. My mother expects me home by... With some annoyance, Arthur shrugged my hand off his arm. You're not scaring me, he told Billy. I've been here lots of times, and I've never seen anything dangerous. Not once. No snakes, no gangs, just some dopers who were too stoned to notice me. Nina stepped between Arthur and Billy. You know what, boys? Logan's right. It's almost 5 o'clock. Why don't we give you a ride home? We've got our bikes, I said. Billy has a pickup, Nina said cheerfully. We can load the bikes in the back. We all looked at Billy. Nina was the only one who smiled at him. You don't mind, do you? Although he didn't seem at all happy about it, Billy muttered, Yeah, sure. To Arthur and me, he said, Don't keep me waiting. It looks like it's going to rain. While we'd been talking, a bank of clouds had risen above the trees, covering the sun and darkening the park. A gust of wind lifted branches, turning the leaves white side out. The kudzu reared up and swayed like a monster, waving long, green, shaggy arms. We'll meet you at the front gate, Nina said. Arthur and I plunged into the kudzu and made our way to the fence. Thunder rumbled overhead, and the wind picked up. Though I didn't think much of Mr. Billy Jarman, I was glad we were going to have a ride home. Chapter 8. Arthur yanked his Raleigh out of its hiding place in the weeds. Billy's a despicable ignoramus with the social presence of a flea, just like his brothers and his sisters and his aunts and his uncles and his cousins, the ones in jail and the ones on probation and the ones who haven't been caught yet. I tugged my bike free of a clinging kudzu vine. 5 more minutes and it would have been completely engulfed. He doesn't think much of you either. I doubt he likes you any better. Well, I wasn't the one sassing him. I was provoking him. Arthur glanced over his bony shoulder at me, not sassing him. Not sure of the difference between sassing and provoking, I stared at Arthur. Why? I just told you. He's a despicable ignoramus. Arthur laughed and shoved his bike uphill toward the remains of the Magic Forest's parking lot. Plus, he was getting on my nerves. At the edge of the parking lot, we came to a quick stop. Nina and Billy seemed to be arguing. She gestured and he shook his head. Under the dark, towering clouds, they looked small and sort of helpless, even Billy. I bet Billy's mad at Nina for offering us a ride, I said. Arthur scowled. He'd better be nice to her. Suddenly, Billy turned and saw us. Get over here, he yelled. You think I got nothing to do but wait for you? He threw our bikes in the truck's bed and told us to get in the cab. The back seat was barely big enough for Arthur and me, but it was better than riding out in the open with the bikes. Before Billy started the engine, the rain hit the windshield in huge drops. To the east, a jagged fork of lightning shot across the sky, followed by a clap of thunder loud enough to make Nina and me jump. Rocked by the wind, the truck lurched out of the weedy parking lot and onto the road. Every time we hit a bump, Arthur's and my knees and elbows jostled each other. His skinny little bones felt as sharp as iron rods. Arthur leaned over the seat and said, Don't you love thunderstorms, Nina? Can't you just see Thor up there tossing his lightning bolts at the earth? She cringed at the sound of thunder. But Billy shook his head. Thor, he snorted. What are you talking about? He's one of the most powerful gods of Acer, Arthur said scornfully. I thought everybody knew that. Billy stopped the pickup so suddenly we all flew forward. Turning to Arthur, he said, If there's one thing I hate, it's a smart-mouthed kid. You want to get out and walk home? Sorry, Arthur muttered. I was glad he had enough sense to apologize. The rain was coming down so hard we might as well have been going through a car wash. But not everybody keeps their nose in a book, bud. With that, Billy stepped on the gas. The tires slid on the gravel and the pickup fishtailed a little. Nina cried out. I fastened my seatbelt. But Arthur just gazed at the rain blurring the world outside his window. By some miracle, he seemed to have lost his appetite for talking. "Please drive carefully, Billy," Nina said. "I hate thunder and lightning and rain." "Say a prayer to Thor," Billy suggested. No one laughed except Billy. Hunched over the steering wheel, he concentrated on driving. Though the upper part of his face was visible in the rear-view mirror, I still couldn't see his eyes. He kept those sunglasses on, despite the steamy windshield and dark sky. After that, nobody said anything. When we passed the Toot and Tote, I said, "To get to our houses, turn right on the next street. Then—" "You don't need to give me no directions," Billy muttered. "Everybody knows where the murder house is." I slumped beside Arthur. Great. I lived in the murder house. Everybody knew where it was and what had happened in it. At last, Billy pulled into our driveway, and we hopped out to get the bikes. Without looking at either Arthur or me, Billy slammed the pickup into reverse and backed out of the driveway. Nina leaned out her window and waved to us. "Bye, boys. Nice to see you again." Arthur and I stood under a big tree and watched the pickup splash off through the sheets of water running across the road. What a creep. Arthur turned and started for home just as his grandmother stepped out on the porch, police whistle raised. "Where have you been?" she hollered at him. "I was about to file a missing persons report." "Riding bikes with Logan, and then the rain started." Arthur glanced at me and waggled his eyebrows as if he were warning me to keep my mouth shut about the magic forest. That was fine with me. My parents would have grounded me for a week if they knew where I'd been. "And guess who brought us home?" Arthur added. "Nina Stevens and Billy Jarman." "Nina was with Billy Jarman?" Up went Mrs. Jenkins' penciled eyebrows. "I told her to hire Johnny." "Johnny was busy," Arthur said. "He told her to ask Billy." Mrs. Jenkins sighed. "Well, I'm sure he can show her some interesting places." With that, she herded Arthur across the yard and into the house. At the same moment the Jenkins screen door slammed behind him, Mom appeared at our kitchen window and called me. The minute I walked through the door, I got a long lecture on the importance of telling people where I was going and when I was coming back. I hemmed and hawed and fudged to keep from revealing where I'd actually been. But I said I was sorry and apologized and agreed to all charges against me. Yes, I was inconsiderate. Yes, I was irresponsible. Yes, I never thought of anyone but myself. And yes, and yes, and yes, guilty as charged. When both Mom and Dad were finally convinced I was truly repentant, I was allowed to sit down at the table and have my dinner all by myself. My parents had already eaten. An hour ago, Mom pointed out with some vexation. While I was dining on cold mashed potatoes, cold broccoli, and cold chicken, Dad sat down across from me. "Johnny said he saw you at the Toot and Tote store on Route 23. What were you doing all the way out there?" "Oh, Arthur was showing me more sights." "Since when is a convenience store a sight?" "In Bealsville, a traffic light is a sight," I said. "A dog peeing on a fire hydrant is a sight. A turtle crossing the road is a sight. A man trimming his hedge is a sight." Okay, Dad interrupted, just as I was getting warmed up. "Johnny told me you were probably heading for the magic forest. He couldn't think of anything else in that direction." "It's none of Johnny's business where Arthur and I go. What's it matter to him anyway?" "According to Johnny, the park's full of falling down ruins and it's overrun with snakes." Dad went on as if he hadn't heard me. "It's also private property. If the police catch you in there, you'll be fined for trespassing." "Arthur's gone there lots of times," I told him, "and he's never—" "Just because his grandmother lets him wander all over the state of Virginia," Dad said, "doesn't mean you can do the same. Do you hear me?" "Yes, I hear you." Picking up my empty plate, I carried it to the sink. "I'm kind of tired. Do you mind if I take a shower and go to bed?" It's only 7 o'clock, Dad said. It was a long bike ride. After my shower, I settled down in my bed with my library book, but my brain was flashing with images of the magic forest and Billy and Nina. I wondered where they'd gone after Billy dropped Arthur and me in front of our houses. What if he asked her for a date? Would she go? It was too disgusting to think about. If only I was older. If only. If only. An hour or two later, Mom and Dad came upstairs, their voices loud in the quiet house. I put down my book and listened. Rhoda told me I should encourage Logan to join a team before school starts, Mom was saying. She also said I should discourage him from making friends with a kid like Arthur. Rhoda, 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 Dad muttered. I'm so sick of hearing about Rhoda and her opinions on everything. If she thinks Arthur's unsuitable, I say encourage Logan to play with him. You and your weird sense of humor, Mom snapped. Can't you ever take anything seriously? I'm perfectly serious, Dad said. Logan is old enough to choose his own friends, and Rhoda has no business sticking her nose into our son's life. But Arthur takes some getting used to, Dad said, but he's a good kid, smart too. He even likes to read. He took Logan to that awful place. I've talked to Logan about that. He realizes the danger. I don't think he'll go back there, but even if he does, at that point, their bedroom door closed and I heard no more. But even if he does, I lay back and grinned. Who knows what Arthur and I might do? I didn't have a clue myself, but whatever it was, it would be better than Little League, and it wouldn't be any of Rhoda's business. Chapter 9. The next morning, Arthur showed up again at breakfast time. Bear followed him in and wandered around the kitchen, sniffing at the door to the basement. I was glad Mom was in the living room arguing with Dad about what color to paint the house. If she'd seen the dog, she would have concluded he smelled Mrs. Donaldson's blood. Without waiting for me to finish my cereal, Arthur plopped himself down in the chair and leaned toward me. I've been thinking about that money, he said. Didn't your dad say there was a ton of stuff in the attic that belonged to Mrs. Donaldson? I nodded. Johnny's supposed to haul it to the dump today or tomorrow. Arthur crammed some cereal into his mouth and chewed thoughtfully. Maybe we should have a look at the attic before it's too late. I knew Mom and Dad wouldn't want Arthur and me rummaging around in the attic, but they were still in the living room, too busy arguing to notice what we were up to. With Bear behind us, we tiptoed up the steep, narrow steps. It must have been 150 degrees in the attic. The air was thick and heavy and smelled of dust and old things, paper and cardboard, wood and cloth. Dim light shone through the cobweb-covered windows at either end. In the middle of the floor, I saw at least a dozen big, bulging cardboard cartons. It was obvious that someone had gone through every one of them. Worn-out shoes and clothes had been flung everywhere, along with books and records, dented pots and pans, photo albums, old bank statements, ragged towels and torn sheets. A broken lamp lay on its side in the shadows under the eaves. Along with an armchair, its upholstery clawed to shreds by cats. A china closet with a cracked glass door stood in the corner. One rusty roller skate sat on a stack of yellowing newspaper and magazines. Get a load of these, Arthur laughed and held up a huge pair of plaid boxer shorts. Mr. Donaldson must have been as big as an elephant. I laughed too, but then I felt sad because the man had died a long time ago and never dreamed his wife would be murdered in their house and 2 kids would make jokes about his underwear. Uneasy about looking at dead people's things, I sat back on my heels and wiped the sweat off my forehead. The money's not here. Arthur didn't answer. He was watching Bear nose through a box of old kitchen stuff, whimpering and whining to himself. What are you after? He asked the dog. For an answer, Bear trotted over to Arthur and dropped a small plastic bag at his feet. Wagging his tail, he barked once. Arthur dumped the bag's contents on the floor. Out tumbled a handful of junky plastic toys, each about 2 inches tall. Some were red, some blue, some yellow. They were all the same, 11 gingerbread men with smiling faces. They're from the Magic Forest gift shop, Arthur said. I used to have lots of them. Snow White, the Crooked Man, Humpty Dumpty, the Dish and the Spoon, even the Witch. But I sold them at one of Grandma's tag sales. All I got was a lousy quarter for the whole bunch. He arranged the little gingerbread men in a row. I should have kept mine, he said sadly. By the time I'm grown up, they'll be worth a fortune on eBay. I picked up a crumpled piece of pink notepaper. This must have fallen out of the bag. Arthur snatched it from my hand, squinting to make out the handwriting. He read, Dear Violet, when that money was embezzled from the Magic Forest, I had an idea who took it, but I never said anything to the police because I didn't have a shred of proof. I'm afraid to write his name, but while he was at lunch today, I searched his office. They're shutting the park down in a few days, and I knew he'd clean out his belongings. It was my last chance to prove he took the money, not me. I searched the file cabinet, the desk drawers, and, last of all, the coat closet. And there it was, stuffed way back on a high shelf where nobody would notice it, a briefcase with his initials on it. I'd seen it before, but not for a while. It was full of money, more money than I've ever seen, more than I ever imagined could be in one place, like something you'd see in a movie, but not in real life. There was no place to hide the briefcase in the ticket booth, and I was scared someone would see me carrying it out of the park. Since nobody was around just then, I hid it where we used to play the finding game with the little plastic gingerbread men. I hope you remember. It's safe there for now. I plan to go back and get it when no one's around to see me. If he notices it's gone before I go to the police, he might suspect I took it. So if anything happens to me, get the briefcase. Whatever you do, don't tell Silas until you've gone to the police. And don't be scared of you-know-who. She's just... Arthur stopped reading and peered at me, his eyes huge over the rims of his glasses. Go on, I said impatiently. That's all? He handed me the piece of paper. It's dated the very day Mrs. Donaldson was murdered. I read the note closely in case Arthur left anything out. He hadn't. Do you think the killer came while she was writing this? He must have. Arthur's voice dropped to a whisper. That's why she didn't finish it or even sign it. He picked up one of the gingerbread men and studied its smiling plastic face. The embezzler murdered her, he said in a low voice, and then he ransacked the house, but he didn't find this bag. Even if he saw it, he wouldn't have thought it was important, I said. Just a little plastic bag from the Magic Forest. Arthur reread the note. If we find the briefcase, he said slowly, we know who killed Mrs. Donaldson. We stared at each other. The attic was so quiet I could hear a fly buzzing against one of the small windows. It was almost as if Mrs. Donaldson was watching us from the shadows, hoping we'd bring her murderer to justice and clear her name once and for all. What do you think she meant by the finding game? I asked. Arthur shook his head. I have no idea. And why did she write, don't be scared of you-know-who? He shook his head again. For once, he didn't have an answer. While I reread the note, searching for hidden meanings, Arthur moved the gingerbread men into various formations, as if he hoped to break a code somehow. If he lined them up just right, the answers to our questions would be revealed. These little guys must have something to do with it, he mused. But what? Shh, I whispered. Someone's coming upstairs. Arthur scooped up the little men, dropped them into the bag along with the note, and stuffed everything into the deep pocket of his cargo shorts. At that same moment, Bear ran to the top of the attic steps and began to bark. Arthur grabbed the dog's collar and pulled him away. As Dad stepped into the attic, Bear stopped barking, but he kept up a low growl. Johnny followed Dad, and behind him I was shocked to see Billy looking as surly as ever. "What are you boys doing up here?" Dad asked. "It's hot enough to roast a turkey in this attic." Billy looked as if he also wanted to know what we were doing. Without his sunglasses, his eyes were small and squinty and set too close together. He looked both stupid and mean, a bad combination. I nodded my head toward Billy. "How come he's here?" I asked Dad. "You said Johnny was hauling the stuff away." I glanced at Billy while I spoke. He was staring at me as if I were a bug he wanted to step on. Dad gave me a puzzled look. "I can't imagine why you want to know," he said, "but Billy has a truck and Johnny doesn't." Brushing the sweat out of his eyes, he added, "Unless you want to help us get rid of this stuff, go outside and find something else to do." For a second, I considered telling Dad exactly what kind of guys he'd hired, but I decided against it. Maybe I'd tell him later, when Billy or Johnny wasn't standing there looking big and strong and tough. With Bear at our heels, Arthur and I dashed down the steps, raced through the house, and sped out the back door. "Get your bike," Arthur said. "We're going to the library, and after that, we'll look for Violet at Walmart."